What's up? Welcome back to another video right here on Free Will Photos. Today we're going to be diving into masking inside of ON1 Photo Raw 2024. We're going to cover the Super Select AI and just some of the basic masking information that I think a lot of people are asking and wondering about, especially if you're new and you're coming from Lightroom or some other program and you're like, hey, how do I use the masking tools inside of this software? So let's go ahead and jump into the computer and take a look. So here's a photo of an animal that is sleeping. We're going to go ahead and add a filter. And one of the filters that I think will work well for showcasing what's happening is a dynamic contrast. Now, if you're new to ON1, this is just a phenomenal filter that you should know about. And we're going to go ahead and mask this in specifically to the animal. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Surreal so that way it really shines through. You'll want to tone this down for your own images, but I really want to showcase how the masking tools work inside of this amazing piece of software. So what we're going to do is go ahead and click on the mask icon right here. And this brings us into what I'm going to call our masking workspace. All right. And up here at the top of ON1, what you see is our masking options. All right. Now, this toolbar is extremely important for you to get familiar with, get comfortable with, because this is where a lot of your settings are going to be for your brushes and things of that sort. So starting over here at the very far left, we see that the basic masking brush is what is selected right now. Coming over here, the next one up is going to be the masking bug. Now you get two options of tools that kind of stay in this area. It's usually the masking brush, which is just the basic masking brush. If you're familiar with masking in any other software, then that's what this is. And then of course you have what we call the masking bug, or ON1 calls the masking bug. And that is essentially like your gradient filter, so your linear gradients and your radial gradients and your reflected gradient. And then if you want to look at more, you'll click this little drop down and you can see we have other filters or other masking tools. Now, I'm not going to cover all of them because that would make this video extremely long. So instead, what I'll do is I will make a dedicated video for each of them. In this video, we're just going to cover some of the basics to get you up and running and comfortable and familiar with masking inside of ON1 Photo Raw. All right. So that means we're really just going to stay above the break here, which there's a little line, and that's what I mean by above and below the break. And so the very first thing that we're going to have here is our gradient mask. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and select that, and you can see that our tools change. So between the basic brush and the gradient brush, or the masking bug, they change. The tools change up here. All right. If I go back to the basic brush, you can see that I can change my brush. Tons of brush settings. I always seem to leave my flow down. I need to make sure that I keep the flow up. Again, we're not going to go into the details of what each of these things does, but I do want you to know where all of these settings are located. So if you need to come over here and modify your brush, you know exactly how to get to it. All right. So just click the little brush icon, and then this gives you all of your different brushes that you can use. Some of these are brushes that I've imported, PSD brushes or Photoshop brushes. That's what you can use to get those brushes in there. But we're going to move on beyond that because that's not really part of masking. Then you get to change the size of your brush. This is relatively straightforward and simple. You can also use the bracket keys to change the size of your brush. Using the left and right bracket right above the enter or return button on your keyboard. That's very standard across most photo editing software, so shouldn't be too hard to figure out or to keep up with. And then we have the feathering, which is really important. I'm going to go ahead and bring my feather all the way down. I'm going to bring it up to 50. So that way 42 is good enough. You can see that there is an outer ring and an inner ring. Now, if you're not familiar with masking at all, then anything that's on the inside of the inner ring is going to get 100% of the effect that you're painting. As you go between the inner ring to the second ring, that's called your transition zone, where your effect starts to feather out or fade away. All right. And then if you go all the way out to the very end and beyond, so outside of the brush area altogether, then there will be no effect in that area as you paint. So be cognizant of how you are setting your feather. For most people's use, 100% is where you're going to keep your feather. All right. You may want to move it down. You may want to move it up, but you want to be very specific when you do that. All right. It's usually going to be at 100%, or it's going to be all the way down to 0%. And that just means that it's a hard brush. Wherever you paint, it's just going to make a straight line. All right. Or it's going to have hard edges. And then the next step up, let me go ahead and put this back to 100. The next step up is the opacity. Now, opacity is really just how dense is the brush going to show up. If you have it at 100% opacity, it's going to affect that area at 100% strength. But if you have it at a lower opacity, when you paint it in, it's going to be at a lower effect. Now, for anyone starting out, if you're new to using ON1 or just masking in general, I recommend leaving that at 100%, because all of the tools have an opacity slider that allow you to really fade in how aggressive your painting option or whatever your effect is going to be. So my recommendation, if you're new, just leave it at 100%. And if you're a little bit more experienced with masking in general and you understand what's happening with opacity because you've been working with it, then by all means, go ahead and use the opacity slider here and modify that however you see fit. And then we have two other options here: paint and erase. Now, painting is pretty straightforward. That means you're going to paint in the effect. Erase means that you're going to erase the effect. Now, the problem that I think a lot of people have, because I even run into this issue myself, and I've been using ON1 for many, many years. Not that long. I've been using it since 2020. So at least 4 years now. And what the issue that I think we're running into, I'm just going to go ahead and hit the letter O. This is what the mask really looks like. This is hidden from plain sight when you're actually working on your image. But you could also work in this space if you so choose. Right now, if you see white, that means the effect is in that area. So essentially this is covering the entire image. So what that is telling me is that this effect is covering my entire image. Well, white equals paint in, or paint. If I click erase, and I'm just going to make my brush a little bit larger, and I'm just going to come right down the center here, you can see that I just painted in a black line. That means that I erased the mask from that area. All right. What this black line represents is nothing has been impacted in that area. All right. So if I hit the letter O and I hide that mask, and in fact, what we'll do is we're just going to paint over the entire cat here, and you could see what's changing. There's no contrast over this cat anymore. So if I hit the letter O, you can see that I just made a really big black blob on my mask. But what has actually happened is the cat no longer has that paint over him, or that dynamic contrast effect over him. All right. So that's what paint and erase really do. Now, if I wanted to bring that back, I could select paint, and then I could just paint this back over the cat, and you could see that it's starting to come back in, and the cat has the dynamic contrast built into it. If you ever make a mistake, don't panic, don't worry, you can always get back to where you were. You can either hit Command Z if it was the last issue or the last mistake that you made, or you can come over to the properties by clicking on your mask icon. And depending on how you have ON1 Photo Raw 2024 set up, either you have this floating properties box like I do, which is right here, or it'll be nested somewhere over here in your panel. Whichever way, it's going to be fine. You could do what works best for you. I personally have gotten used to having this float, and so I'm using it in that way. Now, when I hover over this, if you come down to the very bottom, there's this little circle. If I hover over that, you can see that that's invert. And then if I come all the way to the right here, up the middle, there's this little arrow. It says reset. If I click that, it's just going to take me back to covering the entire image, so I can start over from the beginning. All right. Now, I'm okay with doing that for this particular edit. So in a very practical way of editing this image, all I'm going to do is select paint. And what I want to do is actually invert this mask. Now, what invert does is it's going to take, in this example, it's going to make this little white box turn black. And what that does in relationship to the image is it hides my dynamic contrast effect from the entire image. So it's as if the dynamic contrast effect has not been applied to the image at all. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and you can see that my entire image gets a little bit more soft. Now, having my brush set to paint, if I go ahead and click and drag over this area, you can see that I am painting in that effect of the dynamic contrast onto the cat. Okay? The cat has received the dynamic contrast. And that in a nutshell is very basic masking. If I hit the letter O, you can see exactly how the mask is working. Let's go ahead and reset this, and let's go to the next step of masking, which I think is actually pretty cool. We're going to go ahead and click our masking bug here, and you can see our settings at the top here have changed just a little bit. We now have this preset drop down, which is very handy if you know what you want to do. If you want to do a vignette, or if you want something linear top and bottom. To this day, I still get confused with it, but don't worry, you can use the invert button, and that's what I typically do. I select one, and if it's not the direction that I wanted it to go, I hit the invert button on the mask, so I don't even pay attention to the linear top, bottom, left, or right. I just select one, and if it did the opposite of what I was expecting it to do, then I go ahead and click the invert button that is on the masking properties. But then you have the shape tool here, and the shape tool allows you to do a few different things. Again, between center and edges, I don't really pay too much attention to it, because if it does something, like if I click edges and I click right here, and what that is doing is it's applying the effect on the inside of the circle here, because for some reason what's listed here are the things that are being protected by ON1, which this one is protecting the edges from getting the dynamic contrast effect, and this one is protecting the center from receiving the dynamic contrast effect. Again, it doesn't really matter, because if I click edges and I'm like, no, I actually want the dynamic contrast to be on the outside, I can hover over the mask, and then I can just come down to my invert, and look at that. I've solved my problem. Okay, so it doesn't really matter so much about the shape on the center or the edges. And then when it comes to the gradient, you know, again, if this is where if this is what the effect is doing, it's applying the effect to the top of the image, but I really wanted it on the bottom. I got two options. I could just rotate this using the little circle, which I don't think that that's even. So we're going to go ahead and rotate that back around. And then we're going to come right back up to gradient. I'm just going to click in the center here. And now it's at the bottom, but let's say that I wanted it to be the opposite. I wanted it to be at the top. Well, I can come over here to the masking and I can just click the invert and look at that. I now have the effect applied to the top part instead of the bottom part of my image. So the invert button is going to be your best friend in this case, all right? Or when you're masking. I promise you, I use it pretty much every time that I'm using a mask inside of ON1 Photo Raw. Then, of course, you have opacity. Again, keep it at 100%. That's my recommendation. And we're not going to go into color range, but this is a more advanced method of making a mask or a selection, because that's essentially what a mask is. It is a selection on your image. Now, we're going to get into some of the more advanced selection options that we have available to us inside of ON1 Photo Raw. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and invert this mask. And I am going to click the little drop down chevron next to the masking bug, exposing more options that are available to me. One of the options that is new to ON1 Photo Raw 2024 is the Quick Mask AI brush. All right. Now, this is kind of like the Super Select AI, if you're familiar with that. But if you're not, don't worry about it. Okay. Essentially, this is going to use the power of AI to help you select areas in your photo so that way you can start to make more advanced edits. But it's no more difficult to use than the other two masking options that I've already showcased. This is just a more intricate method for you to be able to use that. All right. And if you noticed in the background, it was rendering because it's using AI to kind of make a selection here. So as I hover over each of the areas in the image, and it does take a little bit of time on my computer, hopefully it's faster on yours, you can see the blue area. Now, I haven't clicked on anything yet because I'm just hovering over so that way I can show you how it's making a selection. Now, here you can see it didn't do the best job, all right? Because if you look down at the paw here, the paw itself hasn't been fully selected. And we're missing some areas on the nose here. And this is what's really cool. So what I'm going to do is just click here, and I have now selected that area. And then I'm going to hover over these little paw areas, and then I'm going to click again, and it's going to add that to my selection. And then I can come over to the nose here that didn't get selected, wait for it to turn blue, click that. It's now selected. It looks like it missed some of the ear here. So I'm going to come over and click that, and now it's selected that as well. And you know, you get the point. You can just come over and hover over the areas that you think need to be selected. Now, what I'm going to do is I have an option to either erase or paint. Now, for this particular instance, I'm going to go ahead and leave it on erase, and then I'm going to hit the checkbox. The reason why I am selecting erase is because I was already applying dynamic contrast to the entire image, so I want to erase it from the cat. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and we should let ON1 do its thing, and then you see that it has now erased this from the cat. So if I hit the letter O, I have a black outline. Now you can see it is not perfect. All right. It missed this area right here. Don't worry. We're going to fix that here in a little bit. But what you can do now is you can come over to your layer properties or your masking properties, because let's say I wanted the dynamic contrast to be on the cat. I can just come down here, click invert, and I now have the cat selected with all of the areas that I wanted the contrast to be added to, but it's not on the background. and I did that using AI. I didn't have to use a brush tool, but I can go ahead and refine this a little bit. So if I hit paint, and I know that I missed this area, if I hit the letter O, it's a lot easier to see, and I can just paint right over it like so, and paint right over this section, and even this area right here. And I think you get the point. You can really clean this up. So now I have a pretty good selection, and I think that I could work with that. Now, when you're working with the AI tools, it's always a good idea to come over and select your feather. All right. Now I'm going to hit the letter O so you can see what's happening when I feather. If I pull this up, you can see those edges just start to blend better into the overall image. The reason you want to use the feather is because sometimes there can be halos around on your image. And one of the easiest ways to clean that up is with the feather tool. You can use the levels as well sometimes, and that will also help you with cleaning up those edges as the transition happens. Not really showing through well here on this image, but the feather, you can see it just blurs those lines just a little bit, so it transitions better overall into like the main image. You kind of have to work with masking inside of ON1 to really get some really good looks. You can get some great selections in ON1. All right, you just have to finesse the tools and really work with it. But they've done a lot better at getting the AI to work really, really well on images, especially recognizing different areas of the image as well. But you will need to do some refining, and I think that that's understandable. All right, I'm going to leave it there when it comes to masking, because I know that I just put out a lot of information, and some of it may be refresher for those of you who have been using masking in ON1 for years. And for some of you, this may be the first time that you are exploring the world of masking inside of ON1. And I just recommend that you go and practice on an image. Don't worry if it doesn't come out the way that you want it to the first time around. Figure out how the tools are working, what the tools can do, and then come back and refine, because there is a refinement brush that works really, really well, and it helps you really clean up those edges and get very, very precise masking. But one of the things that you can also do is just zoom in on your image and use the brush and just paint and erase as necessary to really get those edges. Takes a little bit of time, and it is a little bit of nuance, but if you only had that tool available to you, which is what we're used to, or at least when I started using Photoshop many years ago, there weren't any AI tools that allowed us to get those edges precise. So you just had to go in and do it manually. Thankfully, we do have AI tools that help us get about 95% of the way there, but there's a 5% refining that we have to do. All right. So don't shy away from it, embrace it, and see how it works for you. Now, if you have questions, leave it in the comment section below, and I'm going to do my best to answer them. I know masking is a very intricate aspect of photo editing, and for some people it could be new and a little intimidating, but I promise you, everyone can learn how to mask regardless of what your level of photography education or confidence is. All right, so just practice it and keep going. I'm going to leave it there, and until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.